Estamos no YouTube, Gabriel.
Hello, everybody. We're resuming our activities. I want to present my presenter. Steven Sequeira Gouveia is a PhD by the University of Minho in Portugal. He was a visiting scholar at the University of Ottawa, so that's how we met. And I have great news. A big round of applause to Steven. He just got his PhD Tuesday. So we are here celebrating his PhD.
Muito obrigado. É a minha vez? Sim? Ok. Oi, galera. Primeiro, falar em português e agora vou falar em inglês. Então, Gabriel Mograbi is also known as the Gabigol of the Brazilian neurophilosophy, if you don't know that. Has a bachelor, a master and a doctor's degree in philosophy from the Federal University of Rio de Janeiro. During his doctoral internship abroad as a part of the Sandwich Doctorate, he was a visiting scholar at University of California, Berkeley, under the guidance of John Searle. He did also a postdoctoral studies in the area of philosophy of neuroscience and philosophy of mind at University of Ottawa, where we met, at the Mind Brain Imaging and Neuroethics Lab under the supervision of George Northoff. He did two postdocs. The first one was in 2013 and 14, and the second was in 2019. He researched philosophy of science and philosophy of mind, especially epistemology of neuroscience and neuroethics. He is also an associate professor in the Department of Philosophy at the Federal University of Rio de Janeiro. He was the founder and first coordinator at the NPOF Philosophy of Neuroscience group work, and he is at the moment the coordinator of the same group. He will present the talk, Decision-Making and Levels of Freedom in Quest for Ecological Relevance. And Gabriel, you have the word.
Thank you very much. Thank you for your very generous presentation. So the name of my talk is Decision-Making and Levels of Freedom in Quest for Ecological Relevance. That's what we're looking for, ecological relevance. So my slides are not going. What's happening here? Remote control? Okay, that's it. Okay, so today I'm going to talk about fire, chess, and giving gifts. I mean, if there's not very explanatory, you're gonna see soon. Would you mind to time travel with me to June 11th, 1963? Shocking image, isn't it? So, what's the story behind it? Chin Quang Duc was a Vietnamese Mahayana Buddhist monk. His self-immolation was a protest against the prosecution of Buddhists by the South Vietnamese government led by Ngo Dinh Diem. Can we come back a little more in time? April 24th, 1963. After an insight during meditation, he makes the decision he was ready for self-immolation. He hesitates contacting the senior abbot to tell his decision for 2 days. In the morning of 26 April, he decides to contact the senior abbot. After dinner, he slowly slurps his rice pottage until the last drop, calmly washes his bowl while he waits for the senior abbot to be alone. He approaches the senior abbot to tell his decision. He has permission to the senior abbot who allows his course of action, congratulating him for the decision, but recommends a half-moon cycle of preparation, meaning a 6-hour routine of deep meditation for 14 days. After this preparation process, the monastery promotes a farewell ceremony to wave goodbye to his fellow martyr. In the morning of 11 June 1963, Chin Quang Duc arrives as part of a procession that had begun at the nearby pagoda. Around 350 monks and nuns marched into the phalanxes, preceded by a Gnostic Westminster sedan carrying banners printed in both English and Vietnamese. They denounced the Dinh government and its policy toward Buddhists, demanding that it fulfill its promise of religious equality. Another monk offered himself for the sacrifice, but Quan Duc requires his seniority to be respected. Quan Duc emerged from the car along with two other monks. One placed a cushion on the road, while the second opened the trunk and took out a 5-gallon petrol can. As the marchers formed a circle around him, Quan Duc calmly sat down in the traditional Buddhist meditative lotus position on the cushion. A colleague emptied the contents of the petrol container over Quan Duc's head. Quan Duc rotated a string of wooden prayer beads and recited the words Namo Adia Da Fat, homage to Amitabha Buddha, before striking a match and dropping it on himself. Self-immolations by burning one's entire body are extremely rare. Let's talk about more common actions, but yet within the boundaries of fire as a subject. The cigarette ember case. I mean, I imagine that the most part of you had passed the terrible experience to be in a party or in a concert, and some clumsy or drunk person approaches you and you are touched by an ember. The withdrawal reflex, nociceptive flexion reflex of flexor withdrawal reflex is a spinal reflex intended to protect the body from damaging stimuli. Human Anatomy and Physiology, standard reader. My only concern here is with intended. I would prefer to see inherited by evolution. The reflex rapidly coordinates the contractions of all the flexor muscles and the relaxations of extensors in that limb, causing sudden withdrawal from the potentially damaging stimulus. This is Kandel's book, Standard Literature. Spinal reflexes are often monosynaptic and are mediated by a simple reflex arc. A withdrawal reflex is mediated by a polysynaptic reflex resulting in the stimulation of many motor neurons in order to give quick response. A Dictionary of Biology, Standard Literature. The Bunsen burner and the Petri dish with bacteria. We're still talking about fire or response to fire. I mean, this is so many times replicated. If you light up a Bunsen burner just in front a Petri dish with bacteria, they all migrate to the other side. I hope you're seeing the connections. I hope you're seeing the connections. Can we agree that the monk immolation was a voluntary action and that withdrawal reflex from the cigarette ember was an involuntary action? Can we agree that the monk has extremely augmented, physiologically realized, completely physiologically realized capacities to control withdrawal reflexes in relation to us, neurotypical, too neurotypical, pun intended? Okay, I mean, maybe you see, this is kind of common sense, standard literature. Yeah. These first slides were not brought to you by Capes, nor by Faperge. They are brought to you by Uncle G. Moore and Uncle Wittgenstein, especially Wittgenstein on Übergewissheit, uncertainty. So if you think that looks like a bunch of common sense, it is. But a little less pedestrian and more scientifically informed, because as Papa Quine said, the scope and language in the scope of language of science, an article published in British Journal for the Philosophy of Science, science is not a substitute for common sense, but an extension of it. Are these guys my intellectual heroes? Not at all. They are bitter medicines for solving some metaphysical problems. Okay, again, do you believe that ideally all vaccines, it's lacking a C here, Portuguese interferes, and medicines should pass through a double-blind placebo-controlled clinical trial, a medical study involving human participants when each neither side knows who's getting what? Obviously, treatment to the target group and placebo given to the control group. Okay, let me stop here. So, I mean, if you consider on reasons taking this or that vaccine because its efficacy, you are somehow believing in the first proposition. And I mean, if you take a vaccine and don't believe in this proposition all the way around, or you contradictory, or even worse, you're suffering from some form of performative contradiction. And I think all the same cases as well. We take that bacteria cannot avoid migrating, and we think normally gifted people, they just withdraw their arms when they are touched by a cigarette amber, and somehow this person that is highly trained, that for all and only physical means had trained his brain and body to support, to bear a condition that we, neurotypical to neurotypical, are not able to bear. Okay. If you still don't believe that consciousness makes a difference, I'll try the other way around. That's an article I published with my brother, Daniel Mograbi, which is, by the way, a much more gifted researcher than me, called To Buy or Not to Buy, a review of effective priming and purchase decision. Okay, we review more than 70 articles in a very comprehensive and review. And what we found, first we reviewed all the effective priming literature, and then the literature on purchase decisions, and then the really rare few articles on effective priming affecting purchase decisions, for the pleonasm. I mean, if consciousness is not there, you influence in a way that you're not fully responsible. Actually, we do, well, at the end of the article, we promote some neuroethical considerations, as for example, how we could have public policies to control the illegal usage of those methods. And we review a little bit the law about that in England and US, because those was the first countries that had proper laws to treat subliminal propaganda. And my brother that studied in England did the English part. I did the American part, as I had the experience there as well. For our disgust, our article was cited in the International Neuromarketing Society, and they are studying it as a form of exactly doing the opposite what we were saying and taking advantage of how to use those methods. That's very unfortunate. Okay, this quote that I just skipped was about the brain areas that are responsible for processing of placebo effects. Now, go with me, please. Respond me with a lot of sincerity. Do you think the placebo works because of the starch and the sugar, or do you believe there? I mean, you can name the other possibilities the way you prefer: consciousness, mind, or psychological factors. Please, if you have to bet your money out of your pocket, is consciousness, mind, or psychological factors, or you think that the responsible for the huge placebo effect is the starch or sugar? So again, I think we're getting closer to make an intuitive case in favor of consciousness. Was an article that I published in the Brain, Mind, and Consciousness meeting on India. It was a meeting promoted by the Josh Bedakar College and the Indian Council of Philosophical Research and the World Psychiatry Association. This article was awarded with the Josh Bedakar Award for Young Researchers. It's cool that when I was just turned 37, so that's kind of flattering to be called young. I want to show some. This is a review as well. It's not a systematic review as the previous one, but it's a deep philosophical dive into some experiments. I'm going to show two of them. First of all, this is social neuroscience, affective neuroscience, how these experiments work. Sorry, I'm having problems passing the slides here. My mouse pad is too sensitive. So what happens here is, let me get rid of this bar. Those are the amygdala time courses. How these experiments done? Subjects are not aware of what they are doing in the scanner. They're not aware of what they're doing in the scanner. They think they are just judging if the photos appear left or right. And they are presented white North American citizens are presented with Afro-American and white American pictures. What happens? You can see here, you have augmented, if you see the dotted blue line, you have very augmented amygdala processing, very augmented amygdala lightning for the black faces in subliminal condition. You have very diminished amygdala lightning for white people photos in subliminal condition. But when you have access of consciousness, or better, to side net block, when you have access consciousness, the two lines just collapse. So where is the hypothesis here? Dorsolateral prefrontal cortex, anterior cingulate, and ventrolateral prefrontal cortex are doing the way to repress the unacceptable racist amygdala processing. Okay, and what is very striking, they compare the implicit association task with the processing in the amygdala, and they compare the motivation to respond without prejudice with the frontal lobes. I mean, I think that there's, as far as I know, 569 correlations, positive from one side, 569 correlations, negative to the outside. I mean, this is not a coincidence. And I mean, this is all the description of the areas. If someone wants to dispute the truth of my claims. Okay, let's now move gears. What is the function of this example? Again, as the monk can repress his withdrawal reflexes, people, when they have the possibility of consciousness to enter in the causal picture, they can repress unwanted, unacceptable stimuli. So this is a total different function here in my talk. The sociable contributions of the human amygdala and orbifrontal cortex to incentive motivation goal selection. This experience is very, very relevant, but in a total different situation. Now, if you read my abstract, I'm gonna talk a little about ecological relevance. So how this, I mean, the less important part of this experience are the results. They're are great, but anyways, the most important part of this experiment is the design, what these guys did. The experiments basically, and by the way, this is RCBF, regional cerebral blood flow. It's not MRI, fMRI as the first one. Kind of tricky technique to work with, but they did a great job. What happens in this experiment? What is the experimental design? They tailored individual menus to each one and every participant based on a previous survey that they did on the taste of these people. Okay, so you just have very positive stimuli here, have kind of okay, good, and excellent menus, exactly as you see in a physical menu, or now that you have all those QR codes in some restaurants. It's very similar what you see on the screen. You read the menu and you go for your option. I mean, that's very, very ecologically relevant. That's great design. It's impressive, but I'll do a critique here. For example, there are many other variables that can be included here to compare to a day-by-day situation, and you can imagine that one of them will be price. Sometimes you are in the budget, sometimes you don't want to pay so much. But we could get multiple cases, as for example, Peter showed yesterday. You can sometimes repress to ask for meat because you're in front of a vegan friend, or maybe you are in front of a Buddhist friend, or maybe we're not gonna eat pork in front of a Jewish friend. You can have, for example, this moral consideration, even though this is very ecologically relevant. I'll not go through the details. It doesn't matter, but there was one thing here really important, is that the most difficult trials are the ones that you have two very high stimuli, two very, let us say, high incentive stimuli. Why? I mean, what they show quite well is that when you have two very high incentive stimuli, the difficulty to repress one of them is much bigger. Okay. Well, now, I mean, that's more contentious. Is the monk decision what Peter called yesterday free will type 2? Maybe a very radical case of it. Someone pronounced this sentence, I don't know if word by word like that, but I'm just trying to use my memory. I'm not concerned with a particular event when the final decision is made. I am concerned with the whole process. I am especially concerned with there was a typo, made on moral grounds. There was approximately a sentence of Walter Sinnott Armstrong commenting on Marcel Bras. I think the monk's decision was made on moral grounds. I think that these white American folks, they are able to repress their prejudice, made those decisions also on moral grounds. Okay, so I'm going to define what I think is decision making. The traditional idea of free will, in its metaphysically full-blown sense, one of an action without causal antecedents and free of any constraint, is in equal footing with other scientifically superannuated ideas, vitalism, phlogiston, and geocentrism. Our decisional capacity is completely elicited by causal and determinative conditions of our brain, along with the rest of the body and environment, including social, cultural, economic, and other semantically based conditions in its interactive commerce of information. Any external semantical cultural conditions that could possibly make a difference in our decisional processes must be internalized and encoded in our brains, or any other information processing mechanism any entities could possibly have to guide the interaction with the environment. The second part is when I'm talking to typical metaphysicians, they call your twin somewhere else and blah, 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 or if a Martian, or if a computer, or blah, blah, blah. So we always keep that, to say, no, I'm not just talking about human beings, mice, monkeys. Yeah, if there's any entity that can process information like that and have to cope with the environment, okay, yeah, they have to do everything that I said before. And more importantly, coevolution and co-adaptation are widespread processes in nature, and our interaction with the environment in its full sense explicit above shape both us and the environment. As for example, I'm using this air conditioning control to change my environment in a way that was not imaginable for the Paleolithic man. Okay, shifting gears. What I said in the beginning, I'm gonna talk about fire, chess, and what else do you remember? Fire, chess, and giving gifts. So, okay, impact of chess in learning in IQ children from 8 to 10 years old. How this process of research went through. Cleiton Merino Santana, former player of the Brazilian national chess team, a person that has 15 years of experience in chess, comes up to me and said, "Professor, I want to be advised by you." And I responded, I like to play chess, but I have no background on researching it. Yeah, but I really believe my method of teaching chess, and I'm sure that we're not gonna spend an opportunity. I'm sure that my method is causally efficacious. And I said, but the literature on IQ and chess is a mess. No one can really prove anything. So I asked him, so what's your previous information? He said, I'm a business administrator and a educator. I said, so you have no background in analysis, nothing, no formation in psychology? So I said, okay, so we're gonna do like this. I'll design the whole thing. I will construe the hypothesis. You're gonna run the thing. When you're gonna have Raoni, a very dear friend as well, very gifted psychometrist, to do the hard job in the computer, because I'll not have time to do everything for you, but I believe in your method. This guy came up to me with 21 brochures of his method of how to teach chess to children. What happened? So first of all, what I'm talking about, why I'm talking about chess anyways? You can genuinely ask me, what do intelligence learning and chess have to do with decision making? Typo here as well. As I said to you, I just changed my whole presentation because I want to bring what is my ongoing research to you. Chess is a sort of very rational decision making, weighing among multiple possible courses of action and picking up the one that's more promising. You deal with choices among thousands of possibilities. Chess depends on long-term planning. The strategy during the decision-making process has to be consistent a long time. Intelligence makes a difference in making a better decision. And what about learning? You can genuinely ask me. Like, our method was fully based in decision-making in increasingly challenging scenarios. It's all about logical puzzle solving. Okay, so the kids start learning things like that. Can you see my cursor?
Yes.
Very easy puzzles. And then they got this level of complexity. We're talking about 8 to 10 years old kids. It's impressive. So, decision-making logical board games. I know if they are called strategy board games in proper English, but I like to call them logical board games. As rational as it gets, as I said before, but you need also some self-control. I mean, in 1982, Brazilian soccer national team lost to Italy in the Spain World Cup, and in Brazil and in Brazil this game is called the Sarriá disaster. So in 1 year before, Kasparov played with Petrosian, and I mean, he was surprisingly destroyed. And how that happened? Kasparov compares his loss to Brazil in 1982 in his book. He says, I mean, I was so overconfident. I was trying to prove that beauty is more than pragmatism. I'm not citing exactly Kasparov words as trying to recreate here. I think be reading will be kind of boring. And he says, I mean, I was playing on a static basis. I was trying to prove style, but I was overconfident, and I started to play in an almost irrational way, trying to be as offensive as possible, as beautiful as possible. 2 years ago, Kasparov tweeted, I mean, people always criticize Petrosian for being so defensive, for being boring. I mean, but he won. He proved his point, exactly as Italy with Brazil. He was playing very conservatively. Okay. Quotation by Stanley Kubrick, the filmmaker. Among great many other things that chess teaches you is to control the initial excitement you feel when you see something that looks good. Yeah, take your time, wait a moment. It trains you to think before grabbing and to think just as objectively when you are in trouble. And why not to cite even, let us say, more popular reference as the Mister of Chess Boxing, the 1979 movie on Kung Fu. That was turned even more popular by Wu-Tang Clan, the hip-hop band. The game of chess is like a sword fight. You must think first before you move. Okay, so how the research was conducted. First, we got all the classics, the first cognitive studies in chess. We were impressed. The only one that could prove anything was de Groot, this Dutch psychologist. And all of them tried to prove that chess increases IQ, that sharpens your intelligence. No one could prove anything. De Groot could prove what? Chess increases working memory. And then we got all the reviews because the literature on chess is a mess. And then, I mean, we have 3 or 4 chess like that. We find this Gobet and Campitelli article. They say they review a lot of experiments, but they propose the ideal experiment. The ideal experiment works with controls in random allocation, pre-test, post-test, control group 1, placebo, meaning what is placebo when you're testing chess? Some form of activities is as similar with chess as possible. Group 2, do nothing. You have to have a different person to be the teacher and the tester, and subjects are blind to the experiment. Okay. So what we did, the first in bold are exactly, I mean, this is in Portuguese because I haven't time to translate, but those are exactly the ideal clauses that Gobet Campitelli require, but we did, I mean, you consider that ideal, so we'll try to idealize even more what you did, or you suggest, because no one have done before. We control for the whole methodology applied, meaning you use the same method word by word. I mean, the person that was training follow exactly the books. I mean, the room was exactly the same. Obsessive control almost. Not even the authors were involved in any point of the intervention. We used, let us say, trustable and replicable tool. That was the Wechsler 4 for children, the most used test for IQ in the world. And you have a fully parameterized sample when each concerns gender and age. Okay, so, I mean, there's a bunch of subtests, but basically the 5 legs of it is verbal comprehension index, visual spatial index, fluid reasoning index, memory index, and processing speed index. And more 2 subtests must be, you can choose among them to obtain the primary index scores. So that's our placebo. The placebo for chess has to be strong. So we had checkers, backgammon, reversi, and battleship. Results. In the perceptual organization index, the test for cubes had positive correlations in the weighted measures. We have both weighted and absolute scores for speed processing. Speed processing is what really we have solid results. And for working memory, we just have for digits. I mean, is the first time that we have in the face of the planet a more solid result about the influence of chess, the education of chess in a 3-month intervention to increase IQ in children. So you can train your brain. You can train your brain. But I mean, I was slapped in the face because I was so eager to see matrix reasoning there, because at the end, the chess is a matrix, 8x8 matrix. But I was like, oh my God. I mean, I would exchange all these good results for matrix reasoning because I was so sure that will happen. But that's experimental research. Sometimes reality is slaps your face. Okay, so, I mean, we use both 3A ANOVA, 2A ANOVA, and all the non-parametric measures. Why? Because the pandemics came and our super well-balanced sample, I mean, you have to stop collecting in the second run. That was terrible. I mean, even though you have there's so good results, so, I mean, if it's not pandemics, the results are much more relevant. Again, I'll shift gears about about ecological relevance here. The intervention has ecological relevance 100%, because the intervention is exactly, if they were having a course of chess and not being part of experiment, it will be exactly like that. I mean, we cannot even use my concept of ecological relevance or emulating, imitating situations of day-by-day life in the lab, because, I mean, it's not even emulating, it's the same thing. But of course, I mean, there's no much of nothing new under the sun when you talk about the measuring tool. It's standard Wechsler for children. But when you're trying to innovate with this very robust placebo condition, we have to be very conservative. So if you remember Kasparov quotation, he said, I was playing flamboyant chess as Brazil, and my opponent was playing catenaccio. That means like doorbolt in Italian. So we played doorbolt. We were very innovative here, very conservative there, because as Phillips said earlier, sometimes you don't want to have all the complexity of day-by-day life in the lab, even if you are in the quest for ecological relevance. Okay, classic paper, theoretical paper in neuroscience, adaptive decision-making, ecological validity, and the frontal lobes. A lot of people ask me, why you talk about ecological relevance? It's just a play of words. You want to say they're saying something different from, the majority? No, because I am a philosopher. And validity, for me, is a binary concept. Validity, I mean, there is no half-pregnant woman, there's no half validity. Or it's valid, it's not valid. But relevance, it can be more or less relevant, isn't it? Okay, so if you apply the ecological validity or the ecological relevance to Libet's paradigm, what happens? It's not adaptive, and it's also not veridical. I mean, there's no veridical outcome of a Libet experiment. There's no adaptive outcome of a Libet experiment. Probably it's not relevant at all. And now I want to say something really important. I mean, it's the 10th time that we bring this experiment in this conference. And I mean, first of all, you see the two RPs. You say no pre-plans, you have one timing. You say pre-plans, you have a different timing. I mean, that's enough to say that, and pre-plans for me imply consciousness. If you think that pre-plans don't imply consciousness, let's debate. But what is important to me is not what happens here, it's what happens if you see my cursor before. Because the only way to make this experiment any relevant is to record the queuing, the instructions they are giving way before the first RP. The RP that you see on the left, they were queuing, and I suppose, I kind of suppose that if you're queued by an experimenter, you are conscious in it. Okay, so do you remember the...
Gabriel,
Sorry.
sorry. Just to say that you have 5 minutes to conclude.
Okay, but I mean, we have more 15 minutes because as Eduardo talked with Phillips, I mean, there's not two people for the debate.
Well,
so
you can, yeah, just be flexible then with your.
okay. Decision. This is a book. It was first a special edition of Frontiers. Was published by me and my colleague Carlos Eduardo. It's called Decision Making Experiments in the Philosophical Analysis: Human Choice as a Challenge for Neuroscience. We had the pleasure to had Adina Roskis with Gerd Gigerenza from the Max Planck Institute. We had also Georg Northoff that turned into my supervisor for postdoctoral fellow / sabbatical. And who else? Chris Free from the UCL. That's what brought me to Canada. That's what took me to Canada. So Takashi Nakao, Hideki Ohira, two Japanese collaborators of Georg Northoff, and him, they did very interesting meta-analysis between externally versus externally guided decision-making, operational difference, meta-analytical comparisons, and their theoretical applications. So this is not an experiment, it's a meta-analysis. They squash 300 and something experiments to see what comes in terms of categories when you try to understand the more internally guided decision-making processes and the more externally guided decision-making process, what happens. Okay, so that was the first result. If you talk about externally guided decision-making, you have dorsal medial prefrontal cortex, insula, thalamus, and IPL, and also dorsal lateral prefrontal cortex. When you focus on internally guided decision-making, you have PCC, PACC, medial prefrontal cortex, and STG. Okay, and I said, look, why are the funnels here? What kind of categories are you using? Internally versus externally? And I knew Georg Northoff has a lot of, another pun intended, Kantian inclinations. So he's seeing the internal, the realm of freedom, and the external, the realm of determination. And I said, I ask you please, I was the editor, but I'm assigned my own self as a reviewer, and I asked him to split the experiments in 3 categories. And I asked them to get all the experiments, they are externally guided, guided by moral motivations or empathy-based motivations in a 3rd category. And what they found, after the hints of the editor, dorsal medial prefrontal cortex and insula frontal gyrus light up just for the second person, one-to-one or one-to-the-society type of decision-making processes. I mean, then I receive an email from Georg, and he says, I mean, if you can use philosophy to sharpen neuroscience like that, I prefer to have you as a collaborator more than a reviewer. Okay, so you see the overlaps between the networks here. Okay, so yeah, I go to Canada to try my first experiment in real neuroscience, because as Brazil is a poor country, it's difficult for the very consolidated neuroscientists to neuroscience imagine for a philosopher. So that's a kind of inspirational thing. That's not a meme. That's not any sort of rendering. That's the original Robert De Niro hack license. He spent a month in a cab in the nights of New York to do some sort of immersion to understand what is to drive a cab in the nights of New York. That's exactly my feeling entering a lab. I mean, now I would be able to criticize neuroscience from more internal, pun intended, perspective. Okay, So what we decided to do, we decided exactly to get the findings of here and apply in another article. I mean, in another, this article shows this paradigm. There is, again, based on the difference of internal and internal. So basically, I mean, people first are recorded in a nice closed eyes, open resting state. They have the intertrial intervals. In EEG, they have the stimulus lock event-related potentials, response locked event-related potentials, a feedback of positive or negative or neutral. And what they are judging? They are judging they are judging objective qualities of colors and professions in the external condition, and they were testing preference in terms of colors and professions in the first person condition, in the individual in the subjective condition. Okay, results are not important now because we're talking about ecological relevance, but they can show a very beautiful answer, and they can, we're using FCZ here. We are considering this answer here is about conflict monitoring between two stimuli. Okay. Conflict monitoring is a special, to be able to monitor conflict is very important as well, not just for subjective or objective or second person decisions, but more importantly, for moral decisions. Okay? I mean, we've seen conflict monitoring in the experiment about face perception of different racial groups. Or is important, I'm not going through all the details because I'm running out of time. And I suggest ameliorations in order to construe my own paradigm. So, okay, the general structure of the design is very good and relatively successful. Problems, technical problems. ITIs are very short. If they are, this fact can depower the possibility of showing intrinsic activity relevance, especially for lower frequencies. So we dramatically augmented the duration of ITIs. They are not jittered. What is jittering is during this kind of interval, there's never the same. That's avoid learning, that's avoid, predicting. So, it's more similar to a real decision that you cannot, get used to the pace of the experiment. And the stimuli are not very well isolated in terms of variables. Why? First of all, I don't think professions are a merely subjective choice. They're so socially loaded, and what about colors? I said to them, look, there's no way like color. That looks like Platonic theory of colors. The color, not even Aristotle would say that he understands color as form of matter somehow. So I said, do I prefer red or green? For what? For my shirt? For my bike? For my curtains? So, okay, we decided to augment the ecological value of the stimuli. We tried to do something that would look like Amazon compare products to, like when you are buying something in the internet. So what we decided to do was the simplest form of second person. And let me clarify that if I haven't said before. When I'm talking about first, second, and third person, I'm talking about the outcome. We have a question. First person means here subjective response. Third person here means objective response. So objective means here something that is so intersubjective that we take as objective. Subjective is really a question of preference, of personal taste, of personal judgment. Like, I don't know if you prefer pizza or pasta. And second person is something that the answer will be someone else. Someone else will give you the correct answer if you did the correct choice. Let's see what this brings. So first of all, we created, I'll come back. That were our stimuli. We have three categories of stimuli: wines, chocolates, and books. I mean, as a Brazilian, how did I arrive at those stimuli, considering that I was in Canada, that I have to do empirical research to understand how Canadians give gifts, because that was the second person condition. The second person condition is, I'll go show you. So those are my questions. Which of those gifts for yourself? So you choose whatever you prefer. Which product is more expensive? This is third person, because it's quite objective what the market, has as a, even within a range, the price of the things normally. Which of those gifts for your friend? And then you ask how I love gifts giving. So I said, yeah, that's a great interpersonal question. So here they were choosing for themselves, if they are buying for themselves, or if they just choosing by pleasure for themselves. And here was what they think was objectively more expensive. And this was, what was the key in there? I'll try to. So those are very, I would say, ecological relevant things. If you like wine, and everything was well thought, because here we have two Canadian wines, two foreigner wines, two Canadian brands of chocolate, two foreigner brands, two books by female authors, two books. This is the Papers of Samuel Marchbanks. It's just an abbreviation here. But again, how I arrived on those stimuli. First of all, research on Statistics Canada. Then I entered the streets and I interviewed 60 people in the age brackets that I was working with. There was like young Canadians from 21 to 33. Okay, and I asked them, like, voluntary citation type of research, what you normally give for a friend of your same age in a birthday. And they had to give us three possibilities. And we did all these statistics, and it seems that books, chocolates, and bottles of wine are very common products among young Canadians. So then that's what I call in the quest for ecological relevance. Then I go to major major outlets for this kind of product. I go to LCBO to do research. I go to Shoppers Drug Mart, and I go to Chapters, a bookstore, to see, how the market is going. Let get real stimuli. So those are our questions. So first one, first person, third person, second person. About the queuing, it was set to the participants. That's the paradigm is called, as I showed you, the gift experiment. So that's the new introduction. Is the second person, the answer that depends on a second person. It was said to participants to imagine the same friend across all trials. It was said that friend was not supposed to be a partner, girlfriend, boyfriend, husband. It was said that the friend was not supposed to be the best friend. It was supposed to be like a very good acquaintance that you want to get closer. Why have this queuing? And this, well, before the experience, just imagine a friend, there's a very good acquaintance, you want to give a good gift because you want to get closer, you want this person to be pleased. Because if it's just a good acquaintance, it's not an old friend, you're going to have uncertainty. And also, If it's someone that you want to please, you're going to augment empathy. First block, just hedonic decisions, meaning decisions guided by pleasure. So you see something like that. What would you prefer? Purdy's, a box of Purdy's chocolate, or The Summer of My Amazing Luck by Miriam Talos? Or maybe Robertson Davis, The Papers of Samuel Marchbanks, or Carol Shields on Less? Or maybe, Bergen's Cabernet Sauvignon Night from the Night's Valley, or Michael Zandachi's The Cat's Table? Or maybe the Diva Truffles, or the Rufino Chianti? Okay, second block, we introduce a constraint, an external constraint that, in my view, diminishes freedom, namely price. So now you're not deciding just on hedonic grounds. You're not deciding what is more pleasant. Now you have a confrontation between price and pleasure. Okay, remembering how is the paradigm again? You have the fixation cross, comes the question, very long time windows, jitter for avoiding prediction or learning, the presentation of the stimulus with the trigger, and free time for decision. Free time decision. They were not constrained in terms of time. They could be watching those two products as they were buying stuff on Amazon for how long they preferred. And then again, a jitter and back again. So that's kind of flow. First block, evolved prices. Second block with prices. And the same questionnaire that is used to validate the stimuli was used again to compare behavioral and EEG data. So this was applied before to validate the experiment. I mean, I took so seriously the idea of creating a new paradigm that I went to the streets again after the spontaneous citation research. I went to the streets again with this computer and my 12 stimuli, and I asked, please, can you help me out with a survey? And they judged all these stimuli using those 9 criteria. Okay. Ethical disclaimer. If I criticize your positions, their preferences, views, theories, or results, it is because they are alive and kicking, because I haven't talked about things that are not interested to me. So if I really them,
can you give us, Gabriel, can you give us 5 minutes to close?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
And I mean, if I criticize you, it's because your positions are alive and kicking, because no dead horses are flogged in the making of this talk. I just talk about things that are important to me. Conclusions. Consciousness and rationality make difference. If you want to address the question previously called free will, you need to be in the quest for ecological relevance. Even to study the simplest decisions, you need to cover the whole process, as Walter suggested. Thanks a lot.
Bravo. So we have now time for a few questions. We have like, I don't know, 5 minutes or 10 minutes for questions. So if you have a question, raise your hand.
Sorry if I took so long. I mean,
yeah, don't worry.
I haven't almost slept today because I was presenting something so different, and I said I want to share the stuff that I'm doing right now to see what you think, and unpublished stuff. I'll not show you the results. The results I'll show you in Rio in December, and there was not exactly what I was looking for. I was looking to show the process of construing an ecological relevant task that can test the things that are important to us, and not simply simple motor actions. Okay.
So
questions, was that bad?
You have a question in the chat group. Can you see it?
Yeah, no, I mean, they're supposed to use the,
Yeah, the voice. So, but I can read it if you want. Do you want
I
me?
can read it.
Okay.
Thanks, Gabriel, for this great presentation. I've got one question. Do you really think that Libet's experiments can be critically reviewed so as to challenge our brain unconsciously plans our behavior, allowing for conscious veto to alter the outcome of volition? Well, let's see. So as to challenge our brain unconsciously plans our behavior, allowing for a conscious veto to alter the outcome of volition. Is this because the causal assumption behind the ERP fine-tuned the very notion and possibility of a volitional veto? Okay. Well, Tamar.
Very
About
technical.
I mean, I think Marcelo has shown some compelling evidence. I think that was very interesting evidence. I think there are other people that work on that. I particularly think that this time window is very short. But I think it's possible. I mean, I think there are good evidence that shows this possibility. I don't know if it's ubiquitous. In some sort of decisions will be more difficult to have the veto. But I mean, I showed you somehow a possibility of veto, the frontal lobes repressing the amygdala prejudicious, a lot of quotation marks here, prejudicious first processing.
Okay, thank you very much. Is there any other question? If you want to do a question, just raise your hand. So I have a question. Yeah, first of all, well, I published this book, The Age of Artificial Intelligence and Exploration. And in the introduction, I curiously talk about chess, because like chess, as John McCarthy said, is the Drosophila of artificial intelligence, right? So you can study a lot about human intelligence via chess. But my question is, has nothing to do about this, is very philosophical, I think. So if you put it in the big picture, do you think that the problem of free will, for example, can be solved solely by empirical, or you need the philosophical? And if so, do you need a pairing, like a dance between the two enterprises, or do you think you can solve the problem of free will just by doing philosophical a priori research, or do you need the empirical?
I mean, if I can paraphrase Kant, and Kant is not one of my heroes, I would say that philosophy without science, it's empty. Science without philosophy is blind. That's my short answer for this question. I think we have to be, as interdisciplinary as possible. That's why, I mean, that's the raison d'être of this group, to be sincere. And we have to be open to anything. I mean, I'm very Nietzschean in this way. You have to be open to whatever that makes you stronger. And I mean, I also think the other humanities are very important as well. I mean, the more encompassing you, of course, you have to have focus. Now, I'm not saying that. I mean, in the moment that we are, there's no like contemporary Aristotle that can manage to get the whole picture. But what you can do is to focus, as all of us are trying. I mean, Renato's probably focusing on beliefs and their influence. Jose Manuel is focusing on the specific implications of neurolaw. But you have a broader picture, because otherwise you just get, I mean, you lose the forest for one wood. But you have to have you have to have your tree, your wood, but you cannot lose a general picture as well. So that's what I think.
Thank you. So we have Marcelo with a question. You can turn on your microphone and ask the question.
Okay, thanks, Gabriel, for the talk. My question is a little bit of a clarification question, but also it connects to what you said in response now to Steven. So my question is about that this neuroscience experiment that you was describing in the final parts of the talk. Is it already published? So this is just a clarification question, but in connection to this relation between philosophical inclinations, philosophical views, and more empirical stuff, what was exactly the question that at the neuroscientific level you're trying to answer? Because there is a shift here. You have this aim of having more ecological validity, which I think is very great. But in the Libet studies, the question was very specific. They want to know the temporal order of this willing time and the starting of the redness potential that was something already established in the literature. So the question was very specific. And I wonder whether you have something like that. What's your neuroscientific question in that study? Are you just trying to show the neural basis, or you have a more specific question? So thanks.
Okay. So let's go to the slides. So as I said, let me make things faster here. What we're trying to do is, by the ongoing activity, by the fluctuations of the brain, and the N2, this negative electrical activity that it's very well confirmed to be a form of conflict monitoring. So we have two similar, which one? To predict the three conditions, our hypothesis is that we are able to predict, for more surprising that looks for someone that's not exactly in the field, the subjective decisions with a little bit less accuracy, the second person decisions, but we'll not be able to predict the objective decisions because we are trying, you get the internal milieu to predict the internal milieu. We're working at the subjective level. So by the intrinsic activity, you can test the subjective decisions. And as selves mirror other selves, as Hume said, you somehow by this self that is projecting his self and the other self, we kind of predict. This is one of the various hypotheses. We can even go for redness potential here. As I said, you asked if it was published or unpublished. I was running 24/7 this thing while we were doing the conference in another machine. I will not show the results because they are not ready and unpublished, but I could show the design. And those are the most interesting hypotheses we have, but we have a lot of them. And I think, but those are worth enough. How much? How much the first and the second person are related, and how they are unrelated to the third person. That's the main hypothesis. I think that's quite interesting, especially when you're talking about Canada. That seems the empathy is a value. I think will work. I'm already sure that it will work. But maybe the results falsify our hypothesis. Who knows? We're working on it right now. That's what I said in the beginning of the talk. I'm presenting to, the chess one is just finished. Now we have to, how this process, preparing the papers, the charts, and blah, blah, blah. And this research, we did the ERPs, the ITCs, and the ERSPs of the first block, and now we have to check the second block. And obviously, like, which is the other hypothesis that's quite obvious by the design. I mean, whenever money enters, you're going to have another sort of conflict, not just the conflict between two stimuli, but two stimuli with price. So you have to compare that. The conflict in a merely hedonic condition, meaning pleasure, and the conflict in an hedonic economic confrontation. And then we confront them again. We are hypothesizing that external constraints diminish your freedom. I mean, I think those are very good hypotheses, but I'm able to dispute them if you think they are bad. I mean, absolutely open to critiques, suggestions, anything. But I mean, what I was saying about the Lippitt's experiment, and we talked about that before many times, is I think if you're not recording, in the case of the Lippitt's experiment, what was said by the experimenter, you're not getting the beginning of the relevant process. And that's not true about my experiment, because my experiment is based on something much more ecologically relevant. You use the word validity. I will insist for philosophers, but validity is a binary as a binary condition, or it's valid or it's invalid. And relevance is much more sound because it can be more relevant, less relevant. And so, I mean, Libet depends on that because he wants to understand the function of consciousness and the initiation of an act. So when you give the cueing, that's when you start the process. Why I haven't or I shouldn't record the instructions? Because what it's at stake here, it's really the first, the second, the third person thing. I mean, it doesn't matter what I give as instructions. It really matters the difference between first, second, and third person, because it has a lot of cultural content. It has a lot of content in general. I mean, it's not a thing like, you just have a temporal sequence of basic physiological facts. But I think the Libet experience is very ingenious. It's very interesting. But I think I think at the same time it's very misleading, and it's somehow constraining us to look in other directions. And I think a good design was to show that if the person was not conscious somehow, you're not going to have these movements, these flexions of fingers or wrists. And I think that will be ultimately important for the validity. Now we're talking validity because, I mean, it means nothing in terms of cultural things. It's just flexion of wrist fingers. So here you have a validity. What happened? What was the first generating event? That's my answer to you, but we can keep talking. I mean, I'll be glad.
Thank you, Gabriel.
Thank you.
So we are over. So a round of applause for Gabriel. And we will have a small pause and then we have the keynote.
Do we leave? We have to open the practice room again for water. So we have to close this section and open again.